Hi, I'm Chris Cravens, the artist at 10 Gables. I got some new enamels in my shop today from Thompson called Crackle. There's Crackle Clear, White, and Black. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about how they work, so I thought I'd share my experiments with you. Hopefully this will be an encouragement to you, a starting place if you're considering purchasing or trying these enamels. And I can't wait to hear your feedback and anything you've learned about them. You can just put it in the comments below. One of the things I didn't get into in this video is all of the shop safety that's standard in the workshop. So you want to be wearing a dust mask when you're working with enamels, when you're opening the kiln or looking at bright flames. A pair of the green glasses can really help with your vision. Just the basics. So if you're not familiar with that, if you're brand new to enameling, I highly recommend watching my Intro to Enameling series. I'll include a link below for that. I'll also include links and descriptions for all of the materials and tools that I used in the video. So with that, let's get started. So Crackle Medium is not what you might think. A lot of times people hear crackle and they're thinking of a painting technique where you'll put a layer of color down and then crackle paint and another on top, and you get like these distinct crack lines to make it look like old paint. The way that these products, the Crackle Clear, Black, and White base, so I've got clear, black, and white, work from Thompson is they are medium expansion enamels, but they melt at a slightly different rate than most of the colors do in the series. And so what ends up happening is you get this really interesting result of colors pulling through each other as these enamels bubble and move around at a different pace than the regular enamels do. So I've used this Crackle Clear on many projects in the workshop and I really like it. But a friend of mine is learning how to enamel now, and she was asking me whether she should get clear, black, or white. And not wanting to break my cardinal rule, which is never tell someone this is the only way to do something in enamels, because it's not true. There is always a different way to do things. I decided to go ahead and run some experiments using all three of these. So being the slightly organized nerd that I am, I decided to use one of my favorite tools in the workshop, an index card, to organize my experiment. So what I've done is, and you can do this however you want. I'm just getting you started with experimenting. I took a Ricky Frank class last fall and he calls these tutorials. I've always used the word color test because anytime I get new enamels in, I just like to try them out, try mixing them with other colors, try to overfire them, underfire them, do different things to them just to understand how they behave. So to me, this was no different. I know how clear works because I've been using it a lot, but I just got these two, black and white, in the mail today. So what I did is I just decided to keep it simple today, and I've put clear, black, and white in each column, so I know that I'm testing each one. And then a couple of different things I want to try. So what I want to do is try basically a couple of different things. The first thing I want to do is to leave the metal bare and then put a coat of crackle on and fire it, and then put a coat of color on and fire it. My expectation is that I will see bare metal and a little bit of color around it and bubbles that look like that? We're gonna find out when we run the experiment. The second thing I wanna try to do is put a layer of color down and a layer of crackle and see what happens. So I suspect that we're gonna see some cool stuff happening with the black and the white. I really don't know about the clear on this particular occasion because I've never used it this way. So something new for me today with clear. And then the third thing that I want to do is basically make a sandwich of one color, the crackle, and another color on top. So by doing this on this card, instead of creating 9 different samples, which, whew, buddy, that would have taken us all day, I'm just going to do like 1, 2 pieces of metal. And on each one, so I have, I'm just going to use some 1-inch copper. I'm going to basically apply the different methods, and I'll talk you through how I'm doing it. This is how I like to do these color tests. I don't use like one piece of metal for one thing. I like to mix and match things on a sample. It just makes it easier for me to use. It's less expensive because I'm not using all that metal, and it's less time intensive. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and prepare the bunch of 1-inch squares to run the tests on. I don't really care how good a shape these are in. I just used a bandsaw to cut them and then just cleaned up the edges a little bit so they're kind of smooth, but this is good enough. So what I'm going to do now is just pop these in the kiln for about 10 seconds or so and anneal them to green. Okay, the first thing that I'm going to do is just apply some counter enamel to my samples. I use this jar. I just keep all my sifted enamel from different projects that I don't put back into the jars. Like some of it's clean and I recycle it and I use it with the color it's supposed to, but everything else I just put in a jar like this is counter enamel. Works great. So here are my squares that I annealed to green in the kiln. If you don't know what that is, it's basically just heating the copper so it gets through, you know, just that first, maybe second stage of color change. You can really watch it with a torch if you haven't done this before. It basically just cleans off the grease. Some people swear by using Dawn and water or a surfactant and water. Some people use scrubbies and completely scrub the metal with something like Penny Bright. I learned this from Tom Ellis at Thompson Enamel, and it works great for me, so saves a lot of time when I do it in the kiln. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and just sift on a layer of counter enamel on each of these pieces. I'm just leaving the back raw. So we're going to clean it up in a little bit. And again, I really don't care if these things are scratched up or not. They're just samples. And in case you're wondering, I am laying this directly on my screen that is going to go in the kiln. Just be careful if you do this. You just don't want to get enamel on the screen itself, but if it's sitting on the back of the shape, it isn't going to go on the screen. So, oh, nuts. See? Dropping stuff happens no matter how long you've been doing this. I'm assuming that it happens to people who've been doing it for a very long time, like Tom and Ricky. Me, it's only been a few years, but kind of annoying when you drop something. I like to use these paint palettes just to take things from my fingers over to the firing screen. I don't know, it's just how I roll. If you're not comfortable sifting onto your finger, You can use something like a little solo cup and set your shape on it. Actually, that's a bad example. The back of a solo cup. Just anything that'll get that the edges off of the table or surface so it's easier to move. I'm gonna go ahead and do a couple extra shapes here. I think I might have done my math wrong. I think I am gonna have to do 3 different firings to test our samples. No one ever gave me an A+ in math, so there you go. But I'm just doing a couple extra. I always like to have these on hand in the studio anyway. One thing that I didn't mention, which I should have, always wear a dust mask when you're working with enamel. I don't have one on now, so you can hear me. Now I'm going to go ahead and fire these until the enamel melts and fuses. Okay, now that the counter enamel has cooled off, I'm going to do a little trick that I learned from Ricky Frank. This was on a video he did for Rio Grande, and it is life-changing as far as making quick samples or pieces that you don't really care what the back looks like. What I have in this cup is a bit of a product called Scalex, also known as, I think, ball clay. I'm trying to think of the name that, on Rio Grande, a very similar product goes under the name of Amacoat. It is basically a clay-based product that you can brush onto enamel or things you're going to use the enamel with to keep the enamel from sticking. So I'm just reconstituting this a little bit with some distilled water. You'll see me work from these little 2-ounce solo cups all the time. I use them like they're going out of style in the shop. I find that it extends the shelf life of things when I'm not opening big jars of stuff, and this stuff comes in a huge jar from Thompson. So this looks pretty good. It is the consistency of, I would say, thickish cream, so you can kind of see it dripping off the brush there. There's some chunks in there too. I'm just not worrying about it. I need to go get a paper towel to wipe off my brush handle. I'm just using an old cheapy craft paintbrush, and what I'm going to do with each of these pieces is take the Scalex and just brush a nice coat on the back. You want it to be even-ish, and I say ish because you can kind of see what's happening here. I'm getting some stripes and stuff. Nothing to worry about. So I am going to let this dry and then pop it in the kiln until the enamel melts. Now, if you're a beginner, you may have heard, oh, put it in the kiln for exactly 2 minutes and it will melt. And if you've started making some enamel pieces, you've probably found out that sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not true. Really, it all depends on how thick the enamel is, how hot the kiln is, how close you're holding your torch. All of those things come into play to affect when enamel melts. So in this case, I just kind of eyeballed and watched how long it took this coat of counter enamel to melt and fuse, and I know how long it's going to take to melt again and effectively fuse the Scalex to it. Once this is on, it makes a pretty hard coating on the back. It is really ugly. I'll show it to you when it comes out of the kiln. Technically, you can grind it off and then fire a piece to clean it up, but I have personally not had luck with that. So I only do this on things I'm going to bezel set in a closed back setting, or like this, all of my samples. I'm just cleaning this brush off in really nasty looking distilled water. I use this all the time for Scalex. So the other thing that you can use Scalex for, there's actually a bunch of stuff. I probably should do a separate video. But in a minute, after these things dry and we get going, you're going to see me using a firing pad. This is from Rio Grande, and I'm going to be using it on a screen. I have painted this firing pad with Scalex, back when I got it. This thing's been in and out of the kiln at least 100 times. Actually, probably more like 200 or 300, and it's holding up just fine. So I'm gonna let these dry, fire them, and I'll be back. Okay, I have taken out the samples with the Scalex on the back out of the kiln, and I just want to give you an idea of what this looks like. So you'll see where I have my little thicker areas and the thinner areas, but if you look close, I'm going to try to see if I can get the light to hit it. You can see that all the enamel is covered with the Scalex. The parts that aren't covered as good are these cracks in between. I put it in a little too soon before it was all the way dry, but I'm not going to worry about it because, again, these are just samples, and that little firing pad that I showed you before is coated with Scalex. These things won't stick. Now, I still have some work to do because, oh my gosh, right? So these went through the kiln twice, so my copper is pretty dirty. So there's a couple of options here. You can throw it in the pickle. You can use a product like Penny Bright to clean it up. If you're really crazy, you could even just leave it like this. The enamel will still stick. This is just copper oxides. But if you were doing like a darker color, this part would probably have hardly any effect to your color. You might get away with one coat, might have to do two. As with everything, do your own experiments, find out what happens. I am, when I do the colors, have decided to use this bitter green and mauve purple. Crazy colors together, but this is an experiment and we want to see the effects of these crackles, and these two colors should show up really good. So the bitter green, I know, it can be twitchy on copper, so I am going to go ahead and clean this up. I'm just gonna actually use fiber wheels and just wipe away the oxides, and I'll be back. Okay, now I've got my clean pieces of copper, my color that I'm going to use on the bottom, which is this bitter green, and the three types of crackle enamel: white, black, and clear. And my little cheat sheet for the experiment, so I know what I'm doing. Over here on the left, I have a firing screen with one of these firing pads that I've treated with Scalex. You don't have to do that. I just do. Makes it more of a non-stick event. So I'm going to set this over to the side. So the first thing I know I want to do is create a piece that just has the crackle over bare metal for one of these pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and sift some lines here. So this is the white crackle I'm sifting on. And I'm going to go ahead and sift on the black crackle right here. And then a little bit of clear crackle. So this will give me a nice idea how each of these behaves. You can see when you're looking at this that I've got a little bit of overlap of some black in the white and some clear in the black. no big deal when you're running samples. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this on my firing pad. It's ready to go. I know that I want to do 2 pieces that have a base layer of color. So bitter green is my color for the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and load this one up with some bitter green. Bitter green will show copper oxides through pretty easily. So I'm giving it a thicker coat. Oh, all of these are 80 mesh sifters. So they're putting decent size thickness coats of enamel on these shapes. That's a subject for another video. Mesh size and what it does and does not do. So I'm going to go ahead, let me put this on and then I'll show you how I have these laid out. I know that the back of my kiln, so let's say this is the back of my kiln and the door is up here, that the back and the sides near the back are the hottest spots in my kiln. So when I'm firing multiple pieces, I like to put them towards the back and the back sides. So that's why these are set up this way. I'm going to go ahead and fire these and then we'll come right back. Okay, now we're back with our pieces that have come out of the kiln. This one has the white, black, and clear crackle on it. I put it in long enough to burn the copper oxides out. That's why it looks like nice and pretty champagne pink. Then I have 2 bitter greens. One of these is only going to get a crackle coat on it. The other is going to get crackle plus a color. And so to keep things even Steven, I am only going to go ahead and apply the crackle medium to each of these pieces. And I'm going to let this one sit here for a little bit. And then we'll do all 3 of them, well, 2 of them with the color on top. So here we go. Here with like I did before, I'm going to put a stripe of white, stripe of black, and a stripe of clear on this piece. Oops. Okay. And then the same with this one. Light. Now, keep in mind, this is the first time I have used black and white, so I really don't know what to expect coming out of the kiln. I don't know if the black and white are going to drop down through the green or not. My plan is to fire it just enough to fuse the enamel on top of the green. And then we'll follow our experiment through more steps. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, fire it just enough to melt that crackle layer. Okay, now we're back with our pieces here with either the bare copper and crackle or the bitter green and crackle. And we're ready to continue on with our experiment. So 2 of these pieces, according to my handy little experiment, are going to get another color on top, and this will be that mauve purple that I told you about. And one of the pieces, I just want to see what happens when I continue firing without a color on top. What I'm not sure of is if this, I don't think the clear would make much of a difference, but I'm wondering if the black and the white are going to sink down into this green and make bubbles. So we're going to find that out. So I'm going to set this aside. We're going to fire this one just like it is. And then these other two get the color on top. So I'm gonna sift that all over. And I'm not putting a super thick coat on. I know from experience with working with the clear that putting a little bit thinner coat on the top, so I can't see anything through there, so it's enough to cover it, but not like super heavy, seems to work really well with clear. So I'm going to assume that the same is true for white and black and do it this way. This is what I would tell you if you're going to do your own experiments. Try different layer thicknesses. What kind of results do you get? I really would be interested in hearing about your experiences. Okay, now both of those are ready to go. And we are going to fire these. Now, firing Crackle is a little bit of a peek and see what's going on. This is where I think a torch might be a little easier when you're working with the Crackle, because you can actually watch it doing its magic and bubbling through the layers of color. With the kiln, you just kind of have to gut feel how long is it going to take to melt, and then just look in there and see what's happening. Maybe pull it out a little bit so you can look. If you don't like it, stick it back in there. Let it keep going. I do know with playing with the clear that the longer it fires, the more muddled a piece will become. If that's the look that you're looking for, perfect. If not, don't fire it as long. You'll need to play around with this and see what works for you. So I'll be back in a minute after firing these and we'll take a closer look. Okay, now we can look at the results of our experiment. So the first thing I wanted to do was show you the one I did with a base color of bitter green and then clear black and white Crackle over the top with the nothing on top of the Crackle. What do you think of that? So Crackle works through the layer above it. So when you put it on a piece like this, it's just going to look like black, white, and clear enamel over the top. Now, I tried firing this really long, did nothing, really short, did nothing. If I came in right now and put mauve purple on this, we would see some Crackle effect. So, not saying you would ever do this, but I guess if you wanted to pre-make some pieces to decide what colors to put on at a later date, you could make some pieces for your stash and get them ready. Personally, this probably wouldn't be something I will end up doing. So there you go. That covers that one. This is the piece we made with the bitter green as a base coat with clear black and white Crackle. Now, these colors, again, are opaques. So they're good to work with Crackle. The clear isn't, it looks good. I mean, it doesn't look awesome. Black looks good, white looks good. What I love about the clear is that I can put colors underneath here like transparent wax yellow or beryl green. And those colors tend to show copper flash through them. So when you move them in the light, yeah, you'll see the different colors, but you'll also get that spark of light from the metal bouncing, from the light bouncing all the way off onto the metal. And so this looks good. Well, it looks better, in my opinion, with some transparent underneath, or even better, a blend of both, transparent and a more distinct opaque. I really and dig in the black and the white. You can see where it bubbles up, just basically bubbles up into that top layer. I'm going to go ahead and show you now the one over the base metal. And then I want to talk about some differences. So in this one, there you go. So this was a clear. Now you can see how the light is shining through and hitting that metal. And that's just with, you know, champagne color clear because it's showing the copper through. When you put colors under there, it gets really cool. Then we also have the black and the white. Kind of like on the bitter green, you can't really see the color below the black and the white. Here you can kind of see it peeking around the edges, so this could be an interesting effect, you know, depending on where you put the crackle. So maybe you just put a little spot of crackle on a piece that has a color underneath and then other colors around. These two, so earlier I said the longer you fire something slash the hotter you fire something with crackle, the more muddled it gets. You can see a pretty big difference between how much purple is left on this one than this one. And the reason for that, these were all fired at the same time, all three of these pieces, with the exception of this one running a little longer. These two, same length of time, pretty much the same position in the kiln, but this has more enamel on it, so it would have taken longer for the crackle to get going and moving. Anytime you have more enamel, it just takes a little longer to heat. So that is likely why we're seeing less pull through on this one than this one. So again, when you get ready to play with crackle in your own kiln or with your torch, paying attention to the firing times and doing some practice pieces before you work on whatever it is you want to create is a good idea, so you can understand how it's going to behave. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope it's been an inspiration to you in your own enameling studio. Please leave comments and questions below and I'll be happy to answer them. Have a beautiful day.